and welcome to this webinar on the digital agenda and the human touch. In this era of digital banking, do we really know what humans are for? Are they even necessary, or can they help with the customer experience? We'll be discussing this today and a lot more. We'll be talking about what can and what should be automated, how and when to use the human element, the challenges this brings, and how all these issues play out when it comes to compliance. We'll also be taking questions from the audience. So if you're watching this live, please get typing and send in your questions. I'll be feeding those questions to the audience, to the speakers, and they're all here ready to go. We've got 3 wonderful expert speakers today. So I want to just take a chance to say thank you to them for joining. Thank you for making the time to do this. I'll introduce them in a moment. Also, I'd like to thank OneSpan, who have made this webinar possible. They know a lot about this topic, and they've made a couple of resources available. In your viewing console, you should see 2 documents. The first is on bringing a human connection to remote financial services, and the second is on digital agreements, best practices to remove friction and improve compliance. So do check them out. You can download them and read them later. Don't read them now. Watch this now, but read that later. Okay, so a quick run through of the format. We'll start off with everybody doing a very brief introduction. Then each of the speakers will get about 2 minutes each to do their opening statements and opening remarks. Then we'll go into the main discussion. And as part of this discussion, we'll have 3 poll questions. So please, live audience, click on that and get involved. And I'll also feed the audience questions as we go. There won't be a separate question section at the end. We'll do them as we go. So please get those questions in early. The sooner, the better. Okay, brilliant. So let's get into it. Let's do the introductions. I'll go first. So I'm Jane Cooper. I'm a financial journalist. I specialize in banking and technology. I do a lot of writing, and I also moderate Nextra webinars. All right, who's going to go first? Hossam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Thank you so much for having me today. It's my pleasure. I am Hossam Abu Dahab. I'm leading the digital demand team in Alex Bank. My background is mainly in the fintech area. I worked in several initiatives and several projects related to the digital transformation, especially in the digital financial services and financial inclusion. I worked in more than 50 projects in Africa and the Gulf area in such scope. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, Raquel, who are you?
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Raquel Lima. I work as a product manager here at OneSpan. I'm joining from my home office in Montreal, Canada, and I have experience working in finance and tech industries, basically helping clients through their digital journey.
Great. And Claire.
Hi, I'm Claire Gambdella. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Zopa, which is a UK-based fintech and digital bank. In my role there, I bring together basically all the key areas that touch the customer, so operations, brand and marketing, and also some of our cross-product channels, such as our app and our web hub. My background is actually not in finance, so I come from a mixture of consumer goods, consulting, and health and fitness. So this is my first finance role.
Oh, interesting. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so now let's go into the section where we do the opening remarks. Claire, do you want to sort of carry on talking and be the first to do the opening remarks? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think this is a really interesting topic. And the thing that struck me when I was thinking about digital versus the human touch is that I think that boundary is really collapsing for consumers. Many of us who are on this webcast will know that our interactions, whether it's with a person, whether it's with an online service, we really do that very fluidly, and they're very integrated in the way that we live our lives, especially post the pandemic. And so the way that I think about this problem at Zopa is that it's very important to have service principles. and to know how you want to deliver your services to the customer, and then to think about whether that's best done through a digital channel, whether it's best done using a person. And I think that when you're thinking about delivering both of those, what's really important is that the brand, the way that you show up, your tone of voice, the spirit that you bring to those channels feels really consistent. And so for me, the ideal gold standard is that, you know, the digital channel and the people who are in your business really are very integrated in the service that they provide. But no matter what the touch point, the spirit of the brand and that humanity stays really strong.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Hossam, about you? Some opening remarks from you.
Yes. Obviously, the world is going to the full digital transformation. We all know about that. But actually, in the financial sector and the fintech world, there are several factors we have to consider it when we are talking about the level of human element involvement, such as the customer maturity itself, which we are provisioning the service to such customer, and also the state of the digital transformation. It is different from if we are in the early stage in the digital transformation or we are in a later stage. The involvement of the human element usually is huge in the early stage in the digital transformation, while it comes down whenever we are going in a higher maturity in the digital transformation. Other factors are actually the customer generation itself. We can notice that the millennials and Generation Z, for example, they are happy to work with the digital world and working less with the human element, while the Generation X and the older people, they are much more happier to work with the human to gain trust, the integrity, and so on. Others like the digital process itself. Maybe it is a new process or it is just an old process. We are doing a little bit of change in it. If it is a new process, for sure, we are need the human element to be much interactive with the customer itself. Moreover, the regulation is one of the most important factors we should consider while we are deciding the human element and the level of intervention. The last but not the least, the security factor. It is very important as well. Sometimes the security mandates to involve the human people inside the process, sometimes not. So these are the main factors we have to consider while we are deciding the level of human element intervention.
Wow, there's so much there. We'll unpack. There's lots of bits in there. We'll unpack a lot of that later. We've got questions coming up on that. Okay, before we do that, Raquel, what about your opening remarks?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that I'm super excited to be here with my co-panelists. I hope I can bring a product, and technology point of view to the discussion around, injecting that human element into the digital channel, a topic that personally I find super interesting because it touches, right, our lives, our day-to-day lives. So when we talk about this hybrid approach between human and digital, I think that first of all, it's really important to understand that we're not just bringing human on top of digital, right? That's not going to work. What we need to do is that we need to think, and going back to what Claire was mentioning, we need to think about the user journey in a holistic way, integrated with the brand even, to define when it makes sense to have this human element brought into the digital process and what's the best way to doing so, right? We don't want to do that in a way that will break the user, their digital process. So we want to make sure that we integrate that in a way that is actually bringing value to the user as well. Just a couple of comments for those that are not familiar with OneSpan, right? We are a company that helps clients through their digital transformation. As Hossam was mentioning, security, compliance are key to the discussion. So we focus on providing the solution with secure compliance and easy to use. I think that's something that we always need to keep in mind. It needs to be easy for the users to work with this digital environment. And if I want to say, like, in just one sentence, our focus here is always to build a world where we have trust in digital transactions and agreements, where I think that the human and the digital elements are key. So looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay, brilliant. So when I was thinking about like humans in banking, I always sort of think about the branch. You know, that's where I sort of come across humans in my banking experience. So we have a poll question on that. Let's do the poll question first. So this is about the branch transformation. I guess this is different for different organizations. So the poll question is, what does branch transformation look like at your institution? A, we are shifting resources and/or investment to our digital channels. B, we have closed or plan to close some of our branches. C, we are investing in branch modernization, i.e. touchless services. D, we are considering launching a virtual branch. Or E, we don't have branches, we're a digital-only institution. Okay, so maybe I'll go to Claire. So you're a digital bank. So
Yes.
when we sort of think about humans, can you sort of give us an idea of when or how you use humans? Is it, I mean, typically I would think like branches and call centers, but maybe you can give us some insight to how you go about it.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right to say that where customers would directly interact with humans in our business is via our call centre, our customer service, and our collections and recoveries team, or our vulnerable customer team. So all of those kind of frontline teams. And the way that we think about where it is extremely important to have the customer touch versus, for example, a self-serve journey that customers can use online, is really around three criteria. The first one is the complexity of the product or the mission that the customer is on. The second one is the sensitivity or the emotional kind of value of that mission. And then the third thing is how standardized that mission is. And so, you know, I think that where humans in our business add an enormous amount is working through problems with customers which are complex, which might have quite different answers for different customers, or which are highly sensitive. And so for us, those are the kind of principles that we put around prioritizing human resource. I think, you know, because we are a digital-only business, we obviously have, we select, I guess, customers naturally that are very comfortable using digital products. We have a lot of older customers, but they do tend to be people that are naturally very comfortable banking online, because otherwise they wouldn't come to us. And so for us, it's really about making sure that where there are digital services, the way that we integrate the human touch into those is by having a really considered product design process with a lot of input early on in the process from customers, in order to make sure that actually the product design itself also reinforces the kind of experience that we want people to have. So I would say that almost everyone in our business contributes to the human touch, let's say, of Zopa, but some much more directly than others.
So does that mean if you have, so with this sensitivity, or there's like emotional value, could any kind of product or process potentially be emotional, or maybe potentially you might have a sort of vulnerable customer, or just something that's usually quite straightforward, but for that customer could actually be quite dramatic. So does that mean you have a human backstop for everything, or are there some things that you don't need any human touch at all?
So what would happen in that case is if the person contacted us through our frontline teams, so just they called customer service, let's say, and there were signs that the customer was either vulnerable or distressed, then they would be escalated up into our specialist case teams. So I don't think that you necessarily need to have what I would call a backstop process for everything, but it's certainly important, I believe, to have a way for customers to easily access the help that they need, and for all frontline staff to be able to recognise where a customer might be vulnerable or be, likely to be experiencing some distress. I would say, though, that there are specific areas in the business. So, for example, the bereavement process where, someone has lost a loved one. There are very obvious moments in my mind where it's important that someone can directly speak to a human rather than having to go through a process which may or may not be suitable for them. So that's where, for example, I would say that, just by thinking through the different types of touch points and processes, you quite quickly know which ones need a much more direct route into human help.
Okay, brilliant.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. Hossam, how does that compare with what you're doing at your bank, and how do you think about, how can humans improve customer service, but then in a way that I guess doesn't cost a lot for the bank? I guess there's a balance, isn't there? You want to automate a lot of things to make it all streamlined, but you need humans as well. So how do you approach it?
Well, in general, whenever there is an added value from the human intervention, so we are making a better experience for the customer. Sometimes we need the involvement to help the customer to do specific transaction, or to give him or her the trust to use the digital channels. So whenever we are adding value with the involvement, we are providing a better experience. But anyway, we have to differentiate between two different types of change to propose the human element intervention. There are a deep change and incremental change. Incremental change doesn't require the human involvement, because usually we are adding enhancement or improvement to the digital financial service. While when we are speaking about a deep change, which is usually related to the digital transformation, sometimes we have to involve the human being. For example, I was working with a bank in Nigeria. They just adding posts to the bank branches, adding the human people to just support the people to subscribe using the mobile app, and showing them how they are onboarded using the mobile app, and also how they can transact using the digital channel. So adding the human in this stage, it was very helpful, because the people are just new to use the digital channels to do their transactions, need someone to guide them, and this is sometimes psychologically actually to keep them confident from using the digital, because the people who are new for using the digital channel, sometimes they have a fear about using the channels itself. Another one, sometimes we are recommending the partial automation or the partial digitalization. For example, when we are speaking about the account opening or the onboarding using the digital channels, sometimes we are just asking the customers to enter the KYC and do all the onboarding process, and just activating the account itself once they are visiting any branch and meeting the human there, to make sure that they are the people eligible to open bank account, and giving them some sort of summary about the terms and conditions and so on. So this is very important, because moving to the full digitalization sometimes not fit with, as we mentioned, some categories of the customers. For example, if we're speaking about the self-services devices, right now it is worldwide go to be the best channel to execute some transactions like the kiosks, the ATMs, and so on. Sometimes the customers need to just have some sort of education or have introduction about how they can use the digital channel, and then they are doing all the transactions by themselves. So again, evaluating the factors we just mentioned in the opening comments is very important, because sometimes we are advising to use the human element in some transactions or some processes, and sometimes we are advising that such products or services doesn't require any human intervention. Like, for example, if I'm going to stop my credit card because I lost it, it shouldn't involve any human, because it will cost a time, and sometimes the customer got panic if he go into a long dialogue with the human being. They want just to click and tap the stopping of the credit card or booking a check or something like this. So adding the added value to the experience is the key factor here to decide if we are going to involve them or not.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so Raquel, what are your thoughts after what you've just heard from Claire and Hossam? And does that sort of fall in line with what you're seeing with other people that you deal with?
Yeah, I want to go back to the main points that they both covered in a very good way, and do like kind of a deep dive. So Claire was mentioning that depending on the type of process and depending, I would even add the type of product that the client is working with, we might need some different level, and to Hossam's point, different level of interaction, right? So I like to make things simple. So when thinking about bank transactions, for example, I like to think about two different groups. So the first one I define as what Hossam was calling the self-serve, or like the day-to-day activities, you know, like checking my account, transferring money to family and friends, or, you know, blocking my credit card. That's something that I want to do, as you mentioned, like very quick and with one tap. So for those activities that are like in low value and they are like actually recurrent, I do think that we have a room here where we can play with educating the users, you know, and Claire mentioning like building a product that will guide them through the flow. So it's really easy for them to interact with the application. But even for those cases, like I do think that, as you mentioned, we still should have this offer for them to reach out to the human assistance if they want to, right? I think that we can relate on our lives that there's nothing more annoying than trying to complete a transaction or trying to do something and feeling like you're being blocked by the application. So, and this can cause a lot of stress and friction to the user, right? So I'm saying that for most cases, you will not need this human help, but it should still be offered as a support for the users in case they need to. So this is the first group. The second group, when we look into bank transactions, I like to call the more complex activities where the transactions, they are more complex in nature and they are higher in value. And it's where we cannot use this opportunity to educate the users, for example. So if we think about, Hossam, to go back to your point, an account opening, right? It's a good example because I feel like it's something we don't do every day. It's not a recurrent process, right? At least I don't open an account every day. We do that, what, 5-10 years, maybe if we change employees. So it's a process that it's complex, somewhat complex in nature. It's not recurrent, so that education will not be beneficial to the user because 5-10 years from now, they will forget it. And as a user, it's a high in value, so I don't want to make a mistake, right? If I'm signing a mortgage or opening an account, I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. So for those transactions, that's where I see this human element being brought into the digital channel as a must-have. Because, you know, we mentioned several words here that I was writing down, like we want to make them happy. We need to build trust. We don't want the clients to have a fear of the digital. So that's where I think that injecting this human assistance to this digital process can bring this level of comfort and confidence that will help the users to complete those transactions.
Can I bring up something that Hossam mentioned in his opening remarks? It was about the different sort of customer demographics. Rekha, what with those groups, you've got the self-serve group and then the group that's dealing with more complex transactions. Would you also divide that by age? Like, is it a bit too crude to say that young people are okay with digital stuff and old people need more human touch?
I would approach it more from a product perspective than from a group or aging perspective. I think that as a user, if I'm making a big financial decision, for example, I'm signing a mortgage, I want a human to assist me. It just makes sense. I'm not saying that I need to go to the branch to meet with someone face to face. I will never do that. But I want to be able to connect with someone, on a video chat or a co-browsing session for them to guide me through what I'm doing, so I feel confident. And honestly, I think it will depend much more on the complexity of the transaction, on what product you're working with, than a group, that you're working with. I think it might play a role there, but I would focus on building the best product with the human interaction for any group.
Okay, Claire, what do you say to that? Are you sort of mindful of the difference between old and young, or is it more about the product?
I definitely think it's more about the product, because in the UK, I mean, there has been a acceleration, as I understand it, during the pandemic of older people becoming even more comfortable with an increased range of online services. But I mean, at Zopa, we have a broad spectrum of customer ages, especially because we have a savings product. In the past, we've had an investment product. And fixed-term savings obviously tend to be a product which has a slightly older demographic who have a little bit more access to savings stability. Our savings product is entirely online, so you can open an account in around 7 minutes. Often we get people transferring, large amounts of money into those accounts, and we haven't seen any barrier there for older users. Now, I'm not saying that is the case for every user, but I think it is an argument that says that there are different groups of people with different levels of comfort doing different tasks, and that you should build based on the product or the journey rather than necessarily the demographic, whether it be age or anything else, because we've certainly seen good uptake from older groups.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we've got some sort of comments and questions already. So if you're watching this live, please get typing and sending your questions for our speakers. Before we go to that, let me review that poll question about branch transformation. So let's have a look at the results. So the question was, what does branch transformation look like at your institution? So let's have a look at the results. Ooh, okay, so the clear winner was we don't have branches. We're a digital-only institution. And then the next popular, there was a joint between we are shifting resources to digital channels and we are investing in branch modernization. Then we have closed or plan to close some of our branches was 14.3%. No one building anything in the metaverse though. Nothing. So it was 0. Okay, and let's go to the second poll question if we can. Let's go straight into the second one because we've got a few to get through today. So what is the major cause of friction in your online account opening process? Product choices aren't intuitive, unable to verify the identity of the customer remotely, requires customer to visit the branch, process isn't fully digital, experience isn't optimized across channels and devices, or a customer requires a banker, a banker or a contact agent's help to complete activity. Okay, so we'll We'll review the answers in a little while. So Hossam, with the friction, I guess we've all had that experience. I think Raquel mentioned it. It's just I just keep that as you're talking. I just keep thinking of all these awful situations I've been. Like I've been to a branch to do something, and they say no, you've got to call the call center, or you've got to do it through the app, or then you call the thing, and they say you need and often a process can just end, and it can be really frustrating. So Hossam, where would you say, like, where is it most likely a customer is just going to abandon a process? Is it with online account opening, or I don't know, is it other products and processes that you see the biggest amount of friction?
I think the friction of delivering the service, or the way of delivering the service, is one of the many challenges usually facing the customers, because it came under the umbrella of the fear of interfacing the digital challenges. If I'm using the service from one channel and then completely behaving in a different way with another channel and so on, it becomes sometimes a preventive reason for the customers to use the digital channels. That's why we usually recommend to have a unified customer journey while using the digital channels. From my point of view, I think there are two types of frictions. One is related to the internal financial institution, and the other in a wider scope, which is related to the global scope of using the digital channel. When I'm speaking about the internal scope, we are speaking about the financial institution itself. For example, if we are speaking about one bank, sometimes we are seeing that the same transaction you are using X behavior when you are doing it from the ATM, and then a completely different behavior if you are doing it from the mobile banking app. Another different scenario if you are using it from the internet banking portal or something like this. So the internal friction must be actually killed, because it will just push back the customer to use a digital channel. It is not logic at all to study and practice the full service journey with each separate channel. So one of the strategies to kill such issue is using what you are calling it the omnichannel, which is unifying the user journey of using the digital service itself, what are the channels we are using. So if I'm a customer and go to do a transfer, for example, if I'm doing it from the internet banking, I will use the same journey if I'm using the mobile banking, or even if I'm using the kiosk. Such unification is a very useful and positive action to reduce the friction, which is usually contribute to the increase of using the digital channels for executing the transaction itself. But this is if we are speaking about the bank itself or the fintech company itself. If we are speaking about the whole country, for example, one of the challenges, and actually we were discussing this, me and my friends, that why the customer is insisting to use its bank ATM while in Egypt, for example, making the withdrawal of the money from any ATM, even outside the bank itself, it is for free right now. So why the people are insisting to use the ATM for their bank? Actually, there are some reasons, but one of the reasons that sometimes if I'm making the withdrawal from my bank ATM, I'm using a specific journey. But if I go to another bank ATM while doing the same transaction, I'm behaving in a different way. Sometimes the ATM is asking me about what is the account type. Is it current account, saving account, or credit? But another ATM is just asking me, I don't have a receipt to print it. Would you like to continue with your transaction or not? Another ATM may be asking about what is the amount you want to withdraw. So unifying even the digital journey with the same transaction across all bank digital services or all fintech companies, if I'm speaking about the mobile app, for example, because sometimes I'm paying my bill from one fintech company app, and it is completely different from using the same transaction with another fintech company mobile app. So unification is a key point here to solve the friction issue, which is for sure it will attract more customers to use the digital financial services. And also from the service type point of view, as my colleague said, that sometimes I don't need the unification or even the education for the customer if I'm going to a complex transaction. But I'm speaking here to remove the friction and the day-to-day transactions, such as the payments, the transfer. It is very important. And sometimes there are some guidelines in some countries saying that this bank, if you want to make a transfer, you have to follow these steps. So whenever the same bank is using the same steps, it is decreasing the fraction and the differences between different institutions delivering the same service as well.
Well, that's interesting because when I was thinking about friction and the customer journey, like Claire, you mentioned it at the beginning about sort of keeping the same brand identity and the consistency, but Hossam is talking about that you also unifying across what other financial players are doing. So the expectation of what the process for a certain transaction would be is kind of the same. Claire, do you, when you're thinking about a product or a user journey, are you also considering how other banks do it so that the customer experience and expectation is kind of similar? One example I was thinking, like with phones and like the icons we have for various things, it's kind of the same across things. So
I think it depends if it's an area where we feel that we can innovate and disrupt in order to improve the customer experience, because we're obviously a challenger bank. That means that there are, I think, a bunch of problems with processes in some of the large bank offerings in the UK, certainly, because those institutions are enormous and they've been around for a long while and evolved. And so I think it would be a mistake for us to just orientate in how things are done today. What we try to do is identify areas where we can provide better processes for customers, whether that results in better value, more ease, a better experience. And an example of that would be something like using open banking data to decision on credit cards. This is a partnership that we have in market with ClearScore, where for customers that may not have a huge amount of credit record data, for example, where we would find it hard to offer them a card, they can enable us to access open banking data, which helps us to make real-time decisions around affordability. And that has really helped us to offer more people credit cards than we would otherwise be able to do. Now, that is a different process to what is out there in the market today. But what we have seen is that where customers get a very tangible benefit from changing the process, or maybe using data in a slightly different way than what they've seen before, they're open to do that if they can see the benefit. We've also seen that customer behaviour for things like, for example, income verification, where often instead of submitting documents in a traditional way, if customers can use a more technically enabled approach to submit documents or enable online banking to do income verification, there's a real incentive for customers to remove some of that friction and take up those processes. So my view would be that where there is no reason to get the customer to change, and there are clear things which the customer will orientate around. So, for example, we all know what a play button looks like or what a pause button looks like. There's no benefit in changing the way that you design that just for the sake of it. It just creates disorientation. There's no benefit. And so, of course, we look at where processes are standardized and we're not trying to differentiate. Of course, we look at what's in the market and what consumers can easily understand and orientate to within the design. But we also are not afraid and, in fact, actively seek out areas where we can change the customer expectation for the better.
Okay, brilliant. And Raquel, there's a lot there. Do you have any follow-up comments or thoughts? Or maybe you can give your view on what banks can do to make the customer experience better. Are there any sort of easy, quick wins that they can approach first? Or maybe you just want to respond to what Hossam and Claire have said.
Yeah, sure. So the first thing that I think banks should do when we're talking about friction, and we did cover a lot of scenarios here, right? So I think that the first step is to identify the different sources of friction, right? And depending on the source of friction and the process that you're dealing with, it will require a different level of integration or a different level of response, I would say. Maybe you will need to bring a human, to assist with them doing that. Or maybe, as to Claire's point, it will be something that you want to see what the competition is doing and integrate to your product. So I would say that for the banks, I think that the first step of what they need to do is to identify the point of friction. I understand that there's nothing worse for a bank or a fintech than the customer dropping off in the middle of the process. It's a cost for them. It's annoying for the user, and probably they will go to your competitor, right? Most likely they will not try again. So I think that the first step for the banks is to understand, deep dive into the different sources of friction. And with that in mind, the next step will be to understand the user needs. We did mention an example here, I believe you did, where you're trying to complete something through the digital channel, and then the banks tell you, hey, now you need to stop here and you need to go to your branch. That is stopping the process. You don't want to do that. Our goal for the client and the goal for the bank is to be fast in completion, right? That's something that we need to keep in mind. So for deals that are more complex, for example, the one I gave, we don't want them to stop their user journey. So that's where we need to take a step back, understand what's happening, understand where the friction is coming from. Is it because you need to get a wet signature on a document and you need to go to the branch? Come on, 2022. You should integrate a signature solution to your product, right? We have all the compliances and regulations to do so. So those are the things that I think the bank can do. And to Hossam's point, I really like this idea of I'm thinking about the bank with omnichannel, thinking about customer engagement. We need to support the user through different channels. As a user, one day I might go to the branch. I don't know. It might happen one day. I might want to join with a video call because I want to talk about my wealth management, my finances. So I want to have this interaction with an agent. Or maybe I just want to, do something from the app and I don't know how to do so. I might want to go through an education, a guide, or maybe a quick co-browsing with an agent that will just let me know, yeah, you need to press the button at the bottom that you have been struggling with for like 10 minutes now. So I think that it's key for the user to have all those different channels, that they can reach out to their bank or their financial institution and get the help that they need to at the moment, and to complete the transactions or the agreements that they're trying to complete.
Okay, great. So there's some questions from the audience. I'll go to those in a second. Before we do that, let's review the second poll question, and then we'll go to the third poll question. So the poll question is, what is the major cause of friction in your online account opening process? So the answers, the biggest one, we've got two joint ones. Most popular answers were unable to verify the identity of the customer remotely, and also the process isn't fully digital, it still requires paper. And then also 20% of people said experience isn't optimized across channels and devices. Okay, so let's go to the third poll question. I'll do that quickly. Okay, so what is your institution's top priority in 2022? Improve digital customer acquisition, bring new digital channel capabilities live, reduce the risk of digital fraud, ensure compliance with new and upcoming regulations, replace, modernize existing systems, or improve existing customer engagement and loyalty. Okay, before we go to the results of the third poll question, Claire, I wanted to ask you, it ties in with something that one of the audience has asked. So you're a digital bank, and most of the people that come to you would be already kind of digitally comfortable and tech savvy. There's a question about like the cultural gap about people adopting digital technology. Is that something you have to deal with? Do you have to educate or persuade people in any way to adopt these digital products? Or you already attracting customers who can do this anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the case. The reality is that obviously digital penetration in the UK is extremely high overall. So I think we're not generally an economy where there's a lot of, I suppose, sort of. My understanding is that there aren't that many people without online access at a basic level. That obviously doesn't necessarily translate to online comfort. But I think we essentially, by being online only, there is a self-select bias of people who come to us are people who are comfortable to bank online. And I think that, actually, as we've introduced more self-serve services, things like live chat, we've actually seen over the last 2 years even a very big shift of people even choosing, instead of calling us, to move to live chat channels, to move to self-serve channels. So, we're in a situation now where even versus phoning, the majority of our customers would contact us either in self-serve channels or chat. And so, we have a very digitally savvy audience. Now, I appreciate that is not the case for all banks in the UK. And by definition, the bigger banks, which do have a big branch footprint, that might not be representative of their customer base. So I think that is a reasonable consideration when we're having this discussion. It's obviously a very different context.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so let's review the answers from that. Time is flying. It's just time has just flown already. So the third poll question was, what is your institution's priority? Let's have a look at the results. One moment. Okay. So top priority. Oh, big chunk of people said bring new digital channel capabilities live. Unfortunately, there was no one who said ensure compliance with new and upcoming regulations. That's not a priority. And then also we had the second most popular answer was improve digital customer acquisition. So on the compliance, that compliance with new and upcoming regulations, that didn't feature in people's priorities for this poll question. But I did want to ask about compliance and whether things can be automated or you actually need humans to do compliance. Maybe Hossam, can you give your view on complying with regulations and how much of it needs a human and how much of it can be digital or automated?
Actually, I surprised from the previous result of the poll because the regulation is a key player actually, and in all cases, the regulation, sometimes we are considered the start gate or the opening gate for any provisioning of any digital transaction. But anyway, the regulatory usually, and I can confirm that in Egypt, for example, that aiming the customer security and to deliver the best fit service to the customer itself. So the customer is priority number one. Whatever the regulation is came to involve the human element or to remove it. Sometimes the regulation came and mandate to have the human element itself. For example, if we're speaking about the accessibility, the blind people, the regulation here is he has to has one of the relevant to be at the branch if he is going to open a bank account or doing a transaction or something like this, to ensure that the blind people is fully aware about the terms and conditions and they are signing on the correct paper or the correct transaction they are going to do it. Also mandating the human element here while opening the bank account. I know that other countries or some countries are not mandating the onboarding to be on the branch or something like this. Other countries, for example, you can onboard through the mobile app, but you have a specific limit or a specific amount of money you can do transaction without even visiting the branch during the onboarding and do whatever want without visiting the branches. But other countries, including Egypt, for example, you have to be presented physically in one of the branches at least to be able to open your account. And this is seeking the customer security actually, and also considering some other issues maybe happened in other countries, such as the issues related to the money laundering or the terrorists and so on. So at this case, the regulation here is mandating to involve the human element. On the other hand, some regulations are forcing to eliminate the human element, such as the digital payments itself. Some regulations mandated that at specific volume of transactions, you cannot do it from the branch or over the counter, or you will pay a penalty. For example, if you are doing a withdrawal with 3,000, for example, you have to do it through the ATM. You shouldn't go to the branch and take it over the counter. So at this point, we are considering the regulation is pushing back the human element. Also, sometimes it is in the form of initiatives, not just regulations, such as provisioning the CD and TD booking from the mobile app or the internet banking. So whatever involving or eliminating the human being, it comes from the regulation for sure, and the aim is to deliver the best quality service to the customer.
Okay, so Claire, I wonder what you think about that and the role of humans in the compliance. If we need humans in a process to comply with regulations, doesn't that mean that the tech or the digital solution just isn't good enough? I mean, when it comes to like validating who I am, I mean,
Sure.
Surely there are other ways to do it than me going along to a branch and filling out some paper forms. I don't know, like, do you think one day we should just be able to do everything without humans?
Well, I don't know if we will ever get to that stage. However, I mean, I think the first thing I should say is obviously, the UK market and the Egyptian market. I don't know the detail of Egyptian regulations, so we might be talking about two different examples here. I think that if I give an example of how we think about this at Zopa, our personal loans product, we decision 95% of our loans online in under 6 seconds. Using data that the customer submits with real-time price, and that enables us to disperse money to most of our customers within an hour once they're accepted. Now, that process is not completely free of people because, in the other 5% of cases where the data that we see on them is incomplete, or it's confusing, or it looks like it may or may not be compliant. So, for example, maybe they haven't been at their address very long and we would need to do more detailed checking. Those things would be referred through to a human team in order to check. But what I think technology definitely can do today is to use is to kind of use machine learning, to use data to make a huge bulk of decisions very robustly and in a very systematized way, and then really concentrate people around the areas which are much more ambiguous, that need much more scrutiny. Now, that is obviously different percentages of decisions in different areas. In some areas, the level of automated decisioning would be much, much, much lower because there was much more variance of decision, much more judgment involved. But I certainly agree with the point that the most important thing is to provide the most high quality outcome for the customer we can and the most regulatorily compliant outcome that we can. And so our lens is always, how can technology help us to do that, rather than starting from the point that it has to be a fully technically automated process. That's always great if we can get there, but the outcome is always the priority.
Okay, great. And Raquel, what are your sort of thoughts or comments? Do you think there's a greater or a lesser need for the human touch when it comes to compliance?
Yeah, I agree with what Claire was mentioning, and I do see the technology as a way to help meet the compliance guidelines as well, right? When we are building our product, we do take in consideration the different regulations, and we try to build that in a way that it will support the compliance, that whether you have a human injected into that digital agreement or not. And actually, if you allow me, I just want to pull the results for the last 2 polls that we did. With the friction, 30% said that the main challenge is identifying the user identity. And you don't need to be face-to-face to do so. I think that nowadays we have so many tools in our technology, I know we do at OneSpan, that will allow you to actually bring this to an upper level of verification, because you're not just checking manually the ID for someone that is face-to-face with you. You actually have tools that will take that ID from the government that will, as Claire was mentioning, maybe go through an AI that will verify if that ID is actually true, it's correct, and then we'll bring in even biometrics, right? So we do have the tools in place to make sure that we verify that the person that is opening an account or doing a transaction is who they say they are. And the second point, to the last poll that we did, most users are looking to bring new digital channels, right? And that's where everything comes together. We do have our virtual room at OneSpan, where the user, they can start their journey through this identity verification, where they need to show their ID, they need to go through the biometrics. They join the room with an agent where they have the ability to go through a live session with, audio, video. You can record it. You have an audit log that will come out from that interaction. So what I would say is that the technology, we need to understand this as bringing an extra value in terms of security. You don't get an audit log from a face-to-face meeting, right? At best, you get meeting notes. And with that integration with technology, you're actually making your solution, your process even more compliant.
Okay, great. So we're now sort of running out of time. So I want to do a very sort of quick roundup and summary for each of you. So maybe let's do like 30 seconds each, or maybe even 20 seconds, just a very sort of short sort of final thoughts. May Hosam, do you want to go first? Final thoughts, closing comments?
There is a lot to say still here, but in general, I think we shouldn't consider the digital transformation and eliminating the human element as an objective. We have to consider it like a tool or a journey to deliver the best fit service. Whenever we need to involve the human, we should do, and whenever we have to or we should to eliminate, we have to do it.
Okay, brilliant. Perfect. And Claire, final thought or comment from you?
I would say start with the customer outcome in mind. Don't see tech and humans as in competition with each other, but rather in partnership with each other. And I would definitely echo the point that Raquel made, which is when you're digitalizing, don't try to digitalize the human process or product, but rather really think about it from first principles in terms of the customer experience.
Excellent, thank you. And Raquel, final thoughts from you?
No, just a final thought that I think, to go back to what my colleagues have said, that we need to keep the customer experience in mind. I think that with the last couple of years, we saw a rush from the banks and the financial institutions to move to the remote environment. And now we have the tools. So now what we need to think about is how to bring the best user experience with the tools that we have.
Okay, brilliant. So now we're out of time. We'll have to wrap up. So thank you to all of you for joining. So thank you, Raquel, Hossam, and Claire. Thank you to OneSpan for making this webinar possible. And thank you to all the viewers for watching.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.